Hello, I'm Jim Burris, host of All Things Considered on WABE in Atlanta. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young debate series from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the general election debate among candidates for Georgia's 6th congressional district, which includes parts of Metro Atlanta up to Dawson County. Let's meet the candidates for today's debate. They are in alphabetical order. Bob Christian, a Democrat, is a veteran and a small business owner. Dr. Rich McCormick, a Republican, is a veteran as well and an emergency room physician. And now let's meet our panelist. Sandra Parrish is political and legislative reporter for WSB Radio in Atlanta. And Joe Ripley is a reporter for 11 Alive in Atlanta. For complete rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website. That's atlantapressclub.org/debates. Now, to start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by each panelist. Candidates have 60 seconds to answer each question. And Joe Ripley, you get the first question to Bob Christian.
All right. Mr. Christian, thank you all for being here. Inflation and the economy are the top issues for Georgia voters, according to an 11 Alive news poll that came out earlier this month. How would you describe the state of the economy right now? And if elected to Congress, how will you work to fight historic, record-high inflation?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Sandra, both for being here, and thank you for having me here this morning. It's an honor to participate in the debate series. Inflation is a huge problem in our country at the moment right now, and I have encountered the effects of that with all the people that I've talked to across the district in the last few months as I run for the United States House of Representatives. In fact, I think about eggs when I'm asked about inflation. I met a man in a local Kroger grocery market, and we were talking about the price of eggs. They were at $3.69 for 18 eggs, which was a $1.19 increase over just a few months ago. And in the course of our conversation, the man, Robert, and I asked him, I said, if we were to be able to magically fix inflation tomorrow, would the price of those eggs go down? And the answer that he gave me was no, they wouldn't. They would still be at $3.69. And so while we are seeing a record level of inflation in the country, we are also seeing a record level of profits among our corporate entities, and we have to start to address the problem in a multitude of different ways. Shortening our supply chains, because Georgia produces over 5 billion eggs a year, so we should be able to very quickly bring down those costs, and talk to our corporate entities about the prices that they set.
Sandra Parrish, it is your turn to ask a question of Dr. Rich McCormick.
Dr. McCormick, Georgia's ban on abortions after around 6 weeks is now on the books. Would you support going further and banning abortion outright?
I think we have a reasonable law right now. I think that will be up to the voters. I don't think it'll be up to the state legislation. I'm very big on state laws governing our nation as much as possible. I think we need to keep this away from federal mandates. I don't think that that's the right answer for representative government.
And Joe, your question to Dr. McCormick.
Hey, good morning, Dr. McCormick. Georgia passed the Election Integrity Act, otherwise known as SB 202, last year. Supporters say that this adds accountability to our election system here in Georgia. Critics say, though, it limits voting access and question the timing of that legislation after record turnout experienced in 2020. How would you address concerns from voters who might feel that their right to vote might be threatened for political advantage?
So we do have record participation right now. If you look at our laws, we're actually less restrictive than Colorado. We have excellent access. We have the best access we ever had for a time amount that you can actually go to the polls and vote. You can vote in by mail. You can go and drop box while those polling stations are open. I'm not a big fan of their drop box. I don't understand why people can't just hand in their votes in person. But you have even Sundays open for voting. Having access to have to actually use ID to verify your identity is nothing that should alarm anybody. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter if you're a minority or anybody else. Everybody wants to make sure that their vote is counted and that illegal votes are not counted.
All right, and Sandra Parrish, you get the final question in this round for Bob Christian.
And Mr. Christian, playing off of the question that I just asked Dr. McCormick, do you feel that Congress needs to pass a federal law when it comes to abortion?
Yes, Sandra, I do feel that Congress needs to pass a federal law when it comes to abortion, because we've already seen that the desire of the Republican Party is to make a national abortion ban. Lindsey Graham has already introduced that legislation into the Senate, and that is taking away what they have claimed to be a state's right, what my opponent just declared to be a state's right. And he is joining with a party that is trying to make that a national ban. I believe that we need to codify Roe v. Wade. It was the law of the land for 50 years, and we need to make sure that we protect the integrity of women to be able to make their private decisions with their doctors and with their own families over their own health care and over their own bodies.
And that concludes the first round of this debate. The candidates will now ask a question to their opponent. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask that question, 60 seconds to respond, and the candidate who asked the question will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And by random selection, Dr. Rich McCormick, you may ask the first question.
Bob, your party is continually overspent, overregulated, and overtaxed. We now have record deficits, inflation, and energy costs. How are you going to do anything different than this current administration?
This administration is responsible for the only bill in the last 6 years that has actually brought any reduction to the deficit. The administration is investing in the baseline infrastructure necessary to build our economy and move our economy forward, investing in our workers, investing in our families. And I think that we need to continue along those lines, because as we see, our economy is taking off at a rapid-fire clip. We are outpacing our ability to fill the jobs in the area, and that means that we need to address our immigration situation so that we can start to bring that universal diversity that has made us a strong country into place. I believe that we're on the right path in this country, and that we need to keep moving forward and supporting our families, supporting our workers, and supporting our local businesses.
And Dr. McCormick, you have 30 seconds.
I think this is a clear choice about if you think we're on the right track, if you think that record spending that has caused this runaway inflation, that restricting energy production that has caused runaway energy prices and being reliant on countries like Saudi Arabia and China for your energy. If you think that's going to work for you, then you know who to vote for. But if you believe in the people, people that are empowered over a government to solve our problems and to create job opportunities that don't exist anywhere else in the world, I think you also know who to vote for.
Bob Christian, you get the next question.
Dr. McCormick, it's just last week, prominent members of your party announced that in their quest to become the head of the Finance and Budget Committee, that they would be willing to hold the United States government's debt ceiling and the United States government funding hostage in their goal to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Obviously, in our current crisis of retirement and our current crisis of health care access, would you support holding the United States government hostage so that your party can cut a safety net that our citizens have paid into for most of their lives and rely on in their retirement?
The reason that our Social Security has gone bankrupt is because our government has already pilfered money that was taken from us. Remember, this is our money. I would never suggest that we hold anybody's money hostage. If you're talking about limiting debt and limiting the debt ceiling, I think we have a serious consequence to the amount of debt that we've incurred. Right now, with this record amount of debt, we actually are going to have our largest amount of money spent in repaying debt rather than buying any purchase for Americans. This is criminal. We continue to pilfer the money that's going to be due to our children when they pay into the system. And right now we're bankrupting a country. This is going to be harmful for our children, for our businesses, and for the future of America if we continue to do business the way we do it. And we keep on kicking the can down the road instead of addressing a real problem that's going to bankrupt our economy and our country.
And Mr. Christian, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
It's hard for me to understand how you can say that we are bankrupting the nation. As I have said, we're investing in the necessary infrastructure and the growth products, our families, our businesses, and yet the Republican Party is continuing to attack that social safety net that allows people to move forward. We have to recall that the Trump administration passed a $2 trillion tax cut that blew the first hole in the economy, and now we're recovering from an unprecedented series of global impact and global pandemic, global shutdown, a war in Ukraine, and the first thing we get is that we're now going to hold our own government hostage so that we can shut down that safety net.
That concludes our second round. For those of you just joining us, this is the general election debate between candidates for Georgia's Congressional District number 6. We will now go back to the panel to ask questions of the candidate of their choice. That is until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions of the candidates. I will also determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Sandra Parrish, you get the first question in this round.
Okay. And this can be for both candidates. We'll start with Dr. McCormick. State lawmakers passed a bill this year allowing permitless carry for gun owners. What are your thoughts on that? And would you support any efforts to curb gun violence, including raising the minimum age to own one?
Mm-hmm. You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So I believe that the Second Amendment to the Constitution provides us all the ability to carry arms. I don't think it's law-abiding citizens that are the problem. It's the people who break the laws, who kill people, who rob people, who create violence on other people. I don't believe that in most states, in most cities that have given really restrictions to the Second Amendment have actually had an explosion of violence and crime. I think if you really want to address the gun violence problem, we need to address the mental health issues right now, the economy. If you'll notice that most of the high density of gun violence are centered in democratically controlled cities. And so clearly gun laws have not been the answer, but we do need to address the mental health issue, which has been dramatically underserved, which I witness every day in the ER as an ER doctor.
And Mr. Christian, if you could respond.
The second and third words of the Second Amendment are well regulated. This was an intention to provide, as you said, law-abiding citizens with the ability to carry arms. But since we've passed this permitless carry, this constitutional carry, as they call it, we have seen a huge increase in gun violence here in the state of Georgia, and we're seeing an increase in gun violence across the country. Almost all of this gun violence is being perpetrated by people that up until that moment were law-abiding citizens. An 18-year-old walked into a grocery store and shot elderly folks while they shopped, and he had bought that weapon on the day of his birthday and thousands of rounds. Another 18-year-old bought 2 assault rifles within 1 week of his birthday, thousands of rounds, and walked into a school. And just in Raleigh, North Carolina last week, a 15-year-old got his hands on an unguarded, improperly secured weapon and shot 5 people that were doing nothing but walking their dog and going to work. Guns are rampant in our society, and at the minimum, the first step that we should do is raise the age to buy long weapons and all weapons to 21.
Joe Ripley, it's your turn to ask a question.
This question goes for both candidates. Do you believe people in the 6th District, voters and their families, and across the state of Georgia have access to adequate and equitable health care? And if not, what is your solution to ensure that they do? We can start with Mr. Christian.
Fair enough. Here in the state of Georgia, everybody's obviously aware we've lost 13 hospitals in the last 11 years. 6 have closed just in the last 5 years. And here in 3 weeks, we're going to be losing AMC here in Atlanta, bringing us down to only 1 level 1 trauma center. We need access to not only mental health care, but access to health care at large. And the first thing that we have to deal with is preventing a Republican Party from holding the health care systems that are available to us already hostage to their demands in the upcoming cycle. This is something that has been ongoing in the state of Georgia under Republican leadership, and the only way to solve that is to bring Democrats into power, who are the party that does care about the people's access to health care. Here in the state of Georgia, they have not expanded the Medicaid process yet, and the first thing I would do as United States Representative is provide every bit of leverage and encouragement I could to allow the citizens of Georgia access through the Medicaid process, ensuring 500,000 Georgians, providing 50,000 well-paying jobs, and making sure that we begin to expand that medical care to all of the citizens of the state.
And Dr. McCormick?
So there you go again, Bob. I'm an ER doctor, and I witness this stuff firsthand every single day. As a matter of fact, just a couple of hours ago, I got off my shift. And I'll tell you, turning back to the government to solve the problem that the government created is not the answer. The reason that AMC is closing is because they relied heavily on Medicaid reimbursement, which does not pay the bills. Doubling down on that and expanding Medicaid, which the government continually talks about cutting by 10% every single year, and we keep having to vote on, is not the answer. It doesn't pay the bills. We need a more competitive market. We need to force the prices down and keep the quality high. That's not turning back to the government. If you want to see one example of a government-controlled healthcare system, it's called the VA. It also doesn't work very well. I'm a firsthand witness of failed policies, both in a private and a public sector of healthcare that relies far too much on government intervention. And if you want another great example of a failure, look at the Affordable Care Act, which has been nothing, especially not affordable.
Mr. Christian, I'll give you time to rebut if you care to take that.
Thank you. It's funny that you mentioned the VA specifically, because through the American Rescue Plan, Gwinnett County is actually cutting ribbon on a VA clinic that is being funded by federal dollars to bring VA healthcare access back into our region, to start and try to replace the hospitals that have closed under Republican leadership. And what surprises me the most about it is that specific funding, that specific plan was voted against by the Republican Party. So I have a hard time hearing you talk about supporting our veterans when your party is voting against them.
And Dr. McCormick, I will give you just a few seconds to rebut as you wish.
Once again, turning to the government for poor health care, increasing funding of programs that fail instead of empowering individuals to solve this problem has never been the answer. Every time we turn to the government to solve our problems, it gets worse. Government is not the answer. It never has been in America. That's what makes us uniquely powerful. That's what's made us the greatest country in the world, is because we have always empowered people over the government. Stop turning to the government to solve the problems that they create. It doesn't get better.
Thank you, gentlemen. And Sandra Parrish, your next question.
This is for Dr. McCormick. Where do you stand on the 2020 elections? Do you believe they were fair, or President Trump's claims that they were stolen?
I think we spend a lot of time on the 2020 elections. The 2020 elections are over. I'm not focused on the 2020 elections. I'm focused on the next election, when we take back the House and fix some wrongs. I think the more we focus on that, it's a sleight of hand. Right now, people they don't care about that. The average citizen is not focused on that. They're focused on the cost of energy, which we have limited our energy production here in America. We've become more and more reliant on foreign countries that don't like us. Just going to the pump is not the only problem. Just watching your bank account shrink in value because of an artificial tax called inflation. That's what Americans are focused on. That's what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on past elections right now. This is a time to really make sure that the average American can survive to the next generation.
All right. And Dr. McCormick, I'd like to ask a question, something that you have been focused on. It came out in a campaign email that you sent, and that was being critical of what you call the Biden administration's focus on woke policy in the military and training soldiers in critical race theory and diversity, inclusion, equity and inclusion. Do you think that DEI has no place in being taught in the military?
So when you talk about equity, the military is not a place for equity. It's a meritocracy. It's the one place you can go where no matter what you look like, no matter what your background is, you succeed by effort and performance. The last thing we want to do is divide people on race and economic background. Look, we're all shades of green. In the Marine Corps, we all bleed red. We weren't divided before this. We're trying to divide people on something that doesn't need to be focused on. We're focused on one thing in the Marines: to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy through fire and maneuver, or repel the enemy's assault through fire and close combat. That's the mission of the Marine Corps. It's not anything else. It's not about equity. It's about accomplishing a mission. If you start focusing on something else, you're going to get people killed, and we're going to fail. We saw it in Afghanistan, where we had failed leadership and failed policy, and anybody who sacrificed life and limb, who spent months and years away from their family to watch that kind of end to a war, understands that we're focused on the wrong things in the military right now. It's time to get back to war fighting.
Mr. Christian, as a veteran, do you believe that DEI has a place in military training?
I believe DEI is critical to military training because of the fact that it is an embodiment of all races, all peoples, all places. And I believe that the reason that it is necessary in the military is because we're seeing huge levels of sexually traumatized veterans coming out of the military. We're seeing huge levels of white supremacy being formed out of the military. We're seeing huge levels of racism and conflict within the ranks of the military. Not only that, our military is sent all across the world, primarily on peacetime-style missions, and they will need to know how to interact with the foreign countries and foreign nationals that they come across. I know that that level of training would have been incredibly handy to me in my time in Iraq. It's interesting for me to hear my opponent support the fact that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was a debacle, because it was a debacle. It was a debacle set up by the Trump administration when he signed a policy in place to withdraw on March 2nd and made absolutely no plans to do so, turning over an empty-ended promise to the new administration, who had to scramble to fix the mistakes made by the previous administration.
Dr. McCormick, 15 seconds for a rebuttal, if you'd like one.
So once again, we want to shift blame onto somebody else who wasn't in charge during the withdrawal of Afghanistan. In the military, as an officer, and I spent 20 years in the military, I was over in Afghanistan. I never said to somebody else, I'm sorry I did it wrong because somebody else used to be in charge. that's a scapegoat. We need to take responsibility for our own actions.
Would you care to respond, Mr. Christian?
I would, thank you. The withdrawal date was set by the Trump administration. The negotiations were put in place by the Trump administration, and then no plans were laid for withdrawal by the Trump administration. That encountered, and you, as a military officer, you're well aware of how much it goes into worrying a withdrawal from an entire country, and not a single plan was handed over to the next administration because the previous one couldn't admit they'd lost.
We'll end with that and move on. Thank you, gentlemen. Joe Ripley, your next question.
This question is for both candidates. Policing and law enforcement have been under fire in the country due to recent shootings of civilians, particularly unarmed people of color. What would you do if elected to hold law enforcement accountable and support them in their jobs to protect and serve? Dr. McCormick, we can start with you.
It's pretty simple. You punish the people who misact and do things that are illegal, but you support the police who are doing their job, the law enforcement officers that are doing their job, which is, by and large, most police officers. I always find it egregious when you hold bias against police or military as a whole, when it's really about just exceptions to the rule. When you talk about inherent racism, when you talk about misbehavior by police or anybody else, it needs to be handled on an individual basis. But overall, we need to make sure we support our police. Because we don't support our police, right here in Atlanta, we've seen record crime. We've seen a huge uptick in violence. We've seen it in my hospital system. Every single night, I've seen more and more gunshot wounds, more and more violence. The fact of the matter is we're losing our police officers and recruitment. We're losing our recruitment in the military because the Democratic Party has made it very hard to serve right now because of their policies.
And Mr. Christian.
One of the very first things on my website is rebuild trust in our police. We do have to go forward and work with law enforcement to ensure that not only does law enforcement feel supported and trusted, but the people feel supported and trusted by law enforcement. We have seen again and again and again a number of encounters between police officers and civilians that have gone wrong, gone badly, resulting in deaths that should not have happened on both sides. When I was in Cobb County visiting with officers after we lost 2 of our officers in a shooting down there, one of them said to me, "No good cop likes a bad cop." And that is the truth. But the Democratic Party is pumping $4.6 billion into supporting our officers, dollars that were voted against by the GOP once again, talking about supporting and then doing nothing. And at the end of the day, we watch police officers being beaten with American flags on January 6th and then watch the Republican Party deny them benefits, deny them health care, and deny them even a recognition for that day that they went through. And so I believe that we do need to support our police officers, and the first thing I would do is make them all wear body cameras.
Gentlemen, thank you. That is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Dr. Rich McCormick, you get the first closing statement.
There is a divergence in the parties right now. It's clear. One party keeps on turning to government to solve the problems that they created. One party is continually embracing a increasingly Marxist philosophy, and you can see the devastating results. I'm a Marine. I've always been for freedom. I've always been in defense of this great country, which I deeply believe in. I spent over 20 years of my life in service of my country. And as an ER doc, I witnessed failed policies each and every day. Just last night, a couple hours ago when I got off a shift, I was seeing patients that are experiencing devastating impact of fentanyl that's coming over the border, which is porous. I'm watching over 100,000 Americans die last year. I had 4 patients that died from overdose just this year alone. I'm watching patients who can't pay for their medications because of overwhelming inflation and energy costs. And I'm watching the devastating effects of a government overreach and how it affects each and every person's daily life. We need to get back to empowering people over government, and that's always what's made America the greatest country in this world.
Mr. Bob Christian, you get the final closing statement.
Thank you. Once again, thank you folks for having me here today. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this debate series. The one thing that I would say to everybody is that I'm a father. I have 2 daughters. I'm a husband. I am a small business owner. I'm a nonprofit founder. I'm also a combat veteran. I have served my country equally as hard as Dr. McCormick has served his, and I firmly believe in the greatness of America. And what I do know is we are better than this. We are definitely better than one party continuously doing nothing to support the American people, to support the American family, and to support American business with no policy, no platform, and no other plans than to hold their own government hostage to get what they want. Very suddenly, the Republican Party that used to preach conservatism, law, and order is all about their own law and their own order. If it is not good enough for them, it is not good enough for anybody. There is a clear-cut choice in this election, and you can pick the only party that is supporting women, that is supporting minorities, that is supporting the LGBTQ plus community, that is supporting all of our citizens and our families, and that is the Democratic Party. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that concludes our debate today. We would like to remind voters Election Day is Tuesday, November the 8th, and early voting begins October the 17th. We want to especially say thanks to the candidates for keeping it cordial and on time today, as well as our wonderful panel of journalists for the thoughtful questions. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's Loudermilk-Young debate series. For more information about the series, they will host this election season, just visit atlantapressclub.org/debates. I'm Jim Burris, and I want to say thank you for joining us for these Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk-Young debate series debates from GPB. Have a great day.